Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about use of force. I've got Mo with me, and she was an instructor on use of force. But in light of all the stuff going on in the news, media, and how they're highlighting law enforcement, and also you're seeing some negative responses and reactions to how use of force is being perpetrated, we wanted to get into it a little bit. And I'm going to first outline some stats from the most recent one I could find from The Guardian. It was released in April 2024, just breaking down use of force incidents in the U.S. post George Floyd. And basically they conducted a survey between 2017 and 2022. They had 2,800 agencies, which encompasses roughly 60% of the population. So again, it's not a totality thing. You're not going to have everybody. And it highlighted that there's approximately, on average, again, there's ebbs and flows of this stuff, 300,000 incidents a year of use of force, 100,000 injuries resulting. It doesn't get into the types of injuries, with noting that typically this is non-deadly use of force, was stun guns and pepper spray. They highlighted a few things, that 83% of the people who had stun gun or pepper spray used on them were unarmed. We'll get into that because obviously, if you have a gun or a knife, I'm not going to pepper spray you or try to tase you. That's insane. It also gets into racial disparity when use of force is being reported. We're going to get into that as well. But Mo, I wanted to kick it to you regarding the Florida statutes and kind of what you saw when you were training use of force, as far as skill set, size, training, that kind of stuff, and that'll kind of help lead us into the rest of the episode.
Yeah. So thank you, Tyler. When I would, and let me frame this as well. I am a general instructor in Florida, and I'm also a firearms defensive tactics instructor. So that's kind of my background when it comes to speaking on these things, because I do train in those two arenas. And it's important to not only train them how to do something, but make sure that they understand legally why and when you can do certain things. So as an instructor, we have to be pretty well versed in these statutes and in the case laws that affect force when it comes to those things. So in Florida, it's no different really what law enforcement is bound to than the average person. So I'm going to read something to you. In Florida, a person can use or threaten to use force to defend themselves or another person from imminent or unlawful force. A person can use or threaten to use deadly force to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to themselves or another, or a forcible felony. So that is the same exact, that's the general public, but that is also the same exact threshold that law enforcement is held to. We can use force threaten to use force to defend ourselves or someone else. We can use or threaten to use deadly force to protect ourselves or someone else. Additionally, in Florida, the person does not have to have there's no requirement to retreat before you use force to protect yourself or someone else. Same thing with law enforcement. Law enforcement, the only way it goes a little bit further is we can use force to effect an arrest. Law enforcement can use less lethal munitions, which are designed to temporarily incapacitate or cause discomfort without penetrating the body. We can use that to effect an arrest. Up to, if a person it rises to the level of deadly force, we can use deadly force when we're trying to effect an arrest. We can also use force to prevent an individual from escaping from us. So that's where it goes a little bit further when it comes to law enforcement. With deadly force, the statute is 776.012, use or threatened use of force in defense of a person, what's justified. So we are justified in using force up to deadly force as long as we are able to, the person reasonably believes that such conduct is necessary to defend themselves or another against this imminent threat that they are encountering at that point. And they have to be able to articulate and explain what was going on and what made them rise to that level of response. The other thing I want to touch on is, coupled with these things, there's a lot of federal statutes and things that have case laws that have come down that additionally govern not just Florida, but all states. One of the ones that is pretty important when it comes to force is Tennessee v. Gardner. So that was when an officer can use deadly force to prevent the escape. Like I said, that's where officers get a little more additional protection. We can use force to effect an arrest or to prevent an escape. Tennessee v. Gardner really that was the case that was recognized for governing the use of force measures, and that's the test as to when the use of force, when it comes to deadly force, can be used to make an apprehension. So an officer may not use deadly force to prevent the escape of all felony suspects. It's forcible felonies. We have to look at the circumstance. We have to look at what's constitutionally unreasonable, and we have to weigh, does the suspect pose an immediate threat to the officer? Does the suspect pose an immediate threat to others? And the harm resulting from failing to apprehend them, does it justify the use of deadly force? So when we are teaching these cadets about deadly force, we teach them all of these aspects first before we stick the gun in their hands to ensure that they understand when it's going to be acceptable, what's the threshold they're going to be evaluated on, when is it okay for just physical force, when can you elevate to using one of our less lethal weapons, and when can you escalate to deadly force, which is the highest threshold.
Yeah. Well, and also, again, I just like to reiterate, people don't understand, like, when you are first getting into law enforcement, you have no training, no knowledge for the most part of these statutes of, again, sitting down and reading a bunch of statutes and reading a bunch of case studies. When you get out on the street and you're starting to interact with people and you feel those hairs on the back of your neck, or unfortunately, when you see someone get ready to throw down or pull a weapon on you, you don't know how you're going to react. And so there's a good baseline of understanding, but really you don't know how you're going to react until it happens to you. Unfortunately, there's no way you could do as many simulations as you want, virtual or sim rounds or whatever. It doesn't matter. When it's real, you hope your training's going to kick in and you hope your reaction's going to be fast enough, but that's just not how it's not like that for everyone.
No, not at all. And I will tell you, training is, when these cadets come in, they come from working at a grocery store, being a server at a restaurant, straight from high school, some of them nowadays, because they are so young, they have such little life experience, and then we are literally giving them so much information. It's like drinking from a fire hose in that first 6 months of training. And we're giving them conceptual stuff when you think about it. We sit in a classroom and we're talking about deadly force. We're talking about this. We try to make it realistic by putting them in scenario-based training as well. But again, it's never going to simulate exactly what it is that they're going to encounter out on the street. We do our best to have our instructors play bad guys so we can make the bad guy be as close to a real bad guy as we possibly can. We use simunition rounds. We put them in the simulators where it's the fully immersive simulators where it's wrapped around and they're seeing 360. We do all of those things, but nothing is going to mimic what it is exactly that they're going to encounter out there. And again, they're getting so much information from, legal, defensive tactics, driving, firearms, communications, serving they are drinking from a fire hose. They get all this crammed down their throat in 6 months, and a lot of them roll right into jobs, start the field training program. So now they're getting more information fed to them about how their specific agency wants to do it. And then we go, all right, in 8 months, a year, whatever their training program is, you're good to go out there by yourself. Yes, they are technically good to go by themselves, but they are now trying to overlay all of this information they got over real life situations that are continually unfolding. So it's a lot. I used to say always to my cadets when I was teaching, I would say, listen, I cannot give you a checklist on how to do this job. I cannot send you out with a to-do list and say, as long as you do this, 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 and this, everything will go great. I said, what my job is in the next 6 months is to try to teach you how to think, because you have got to be able to make real-time situations based on the information that I've given you, overlay it on those real-life scenarios, and then figure out how to think through that particular situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And try not to jump ahead too far, but can you talk a little bit about again, there's been an evolution and use of force in law enforcement, and I do think law enforcement as a whole is headed in the right direction with, advancements in technology, training, and understanding. But it kind of like what you talked about with Tennessee versus Gardner, there's law enforcement has to evolve. So during that time frame, basically, if someone committed a felony, didn't matter what kind of felony, and they were running, you could shoot them right in the back.
Yes.
And kill them. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that case involved burglary or something like that. So somebody broke into a house, was running, and he shot him when he was jumping a fence.
Yeah, it was something. That was the gist of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I'm trying to just oversummarize. I'm not trying to get bogged down in case law. And it was considered at the time heinous that would happen. Like, how can you shoot this person in the back? I think it ended up being like a 16-year-old kid, which we could talk about that as well, because they like to, people like the Monday morning quarterback. Oh my God, how can you do this to a 16, 17-year-old? They're kids. They're not even adults. It's like, well, I have no idea what age they are when I'm in the middle of trying to stop them from doing what they're doing, or gender or race in front of them. They're covered up. All these things get thrown out the window in the moment. And then afterwards you have to like, okay, what is the situation? Again, jumping ahead. But there used to be a use of force matrix. I think there, in some capacity, there still kind of is. But that has been thrown out the window because it used to be like, hey, if it's unarmed, then you can't use any tools. If they have this, then you can use this. If they do this, then you can use your stuff. It's like all that kind of gets thrown out the window because there's a difference in skill set, size, and then also your training level. But again, I never was an instructor. Could you talk how you would explain that or what you saw through that?
Yeah, how we would explain to them, like weighing all of these pieces of the puzzle, essentially. Yeah,
like, hey, I'm 6'5", 300. If arresting a 5'2" female, I can't just beat the hell out of her or stun her or pepper spray her face. It's like, you got to get to a certain level, especially if she's unarmed. But on the flip side, if you're a 5'2" female officer trying to arrest a 6'5", 300-pound man, and he's got you pinned on the ground, you don't have to go through this whole. No, you can pull your gun and shoot him.
Absolutely. So, and that's where the scenario, when we are doing the defensive tactics or we're doing the deadly force, when we're on the gun range, we talk them through scenarios like that, because the idea again is I can't tell you every single scenario that you're going to encounter out there, but it's not just size factors. It's your fitness level, how long, if you're fighting for a certain length of time, when is your threshold as to where you think I'm not going to be able to hold my own any longer. So we have to articulate to them size matters. Size absolutely matters in this factor, because the guy, and we will point out, you that can bench 450 pounds and that you're 6'5", you are going to have to use other means before you're going to escalate. You're going to have to go through that evolution of, I went hands-on, then I escalated to this, then I escalated to this. Whereas the girl who is 90 pounds or the guy that's slight frame as well, it's 90 pounds, 5'1", it's not about gender at that point. It is absolute size factor. That guy, male officer deputy that's 5'1", we explain to them that you don't. When that guy who's 6'5" runs up and punches you in the mouth and you stumble back and you realize that you're dazed, you are not required then at that point to just trade punches with this guy. Yeah. Because that's a death sentence. That guy's going to knock you out, take your gun, and kill you. That's the reality of what could happen if that individual is driven to do such.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to make it a male-female thing. I just want to reiterate. There's plenty of females I know that will spider monkey your ass and choke you out because they have that skill set and training that I don't have. So again, I didn't mean for it to come off that way. Yeah, it's size, training, all those things come into play.
Absolutely. And we talked to them about size. Like I said, it's not just size. It also comes into play with if you're fighting someone and you start to fatigue and you're going, I'm not doing well, or the person gets you in a bad situation, even you size. We've talked about how big you are, but some girl spider monkeys you and now she's got you in a sleeper or she's choking you out. You can escalate to a different level than what you would normally do if it's a different situation. So we try to walk them through scenarios so that they're able to see in real world time when they can react differently. And the big thing I always tell them is you have to be able to explain and articulate. So it's not just getting yourself in that situation. You're going to have to write a report about it. You're going to have to, depending on the situation. Sometimes if you're in deadly force, you're not going to write the report, but you're going to need to explain and articulate to a detective why you got to this point, and you have to be so detailed and so precise. You need to not say, yeah, so I got, she grabbed a hold of me, and when she did it, I felt like it was a little scary. So that's very vague terms.
Yeah.
You have to say, I was in a fight. She managed to get on my back. When she did, she wrapped her arm around my neck. She started to squeeze my neck, and I felt myself starting to lose vision, and my vision started to slowly close in. I felt like I was going to pass out. I was in fear that if I passed out, that this was going to happen. So it's that detailed is how you've got to be able to explain and articulate that situation, because every single one is going to be unique and different. And you've got to explain to me those factors that we're talking about. Was it a size factor? Was it a factor of the person got the best of you? Was it a factor of you were fatigued? All those things need to be explained in that scenario.
Yeah. And again, I could speak from my own personal experience because of my size. And I would say when I started law enforcement, I was competent street fighter at best, meaning smash, slam onto the ground, use my size and weight. That I was comfortable with that. And they beat into this, hey, you're a big dude. You really got to be careful before you go to your belt for pepper spray or a taser. For like the first 2 years, like if you resisted or whatever, I was just like fighting you with my bare hands. And it took a sergeant, again, names don't matter, but it took a sergeant to say, Martin, listen to me, man. If you can do all this carnage and destruction, just tase him, bro. Like, it's much less dangerous. It's much less paperwork. And you don't risk yourself getting injured or breaking your hands or your bones. And I was like, oh. And then that's when I started being more comfortable doing it. So I never used pepper spray because I was worried about getting myself or because I have horrible reactions to it. So I never used a pepper spray, but I used a taser many times. And for those who don't know what a taser is, back when I did it, it's prongs that you can use it as a drive stun, meaning just the contact of the skin, or you can shoot and there's prongs that connect with your body. It's not infallible. If you're wearing thick clothes or hitched jeans, it doesn't always make good connection. Or if the suspect is on whatever drugs, sometimes that shit don't work. They'll just rip it out of their body, and it doesn't always work. But it also doesn't mean it doesn't fucking hurt. Because when I was there, they were using 50,000 volts. They now have them that are 80,000, and I'm like, good Lord.
Yeah.
And again, in Hillsborough, you had to feel the effects of anything with the exception of, obviously, but you had to feel the effects of what it felt like to be tased, what it felt like to be pepper sprayed. So that way you have some sort of understanding that you're inflicting upon this other person. So I was tased. That shit, listen, just because it's not lethal doesn't mean that shit don't hurt like a motherfucker.
It is awful. I will tell you, I got tased with the old tasers as well. It was awful. And for me, the awful part was your brain was still working, but you couldn't do anything. I was like,
hell no. Yeah. But again, that being said, I tased plenty of people, and usually one cycle, which is like it's a 5-second ride. That's enough. But I've had to tase dudes 3-4 times before they finally went whoop, and then you see them just drop, and you're like, oh, okay. And then you handcuff, then it's over.
Yeah.
But again, there's not one size fits all. It's like, why'd you tase this guy 5 times, this guy 1 time? Because it worked on him 1 time. I mean, so those types of things. And let me just explain: race, size, none of it really comes into play. I've seen females take 2, 3, 4 cycles, men, drugs. I mean, there's so many factors that come into it. Adrenaline. I mean, whatever it is.
Yeah. And
whatever it is.
To touch on one of the things that you just said too, going to the hands-on for a guy that's a really big guy, when you say that you have to show the evolution, it doesn't mean that you've got to trade punches with somebody first before you put something on your belt. Because if you can articulate, this person was resisting me, this is what it took for me to gain control of them, and you're within and I don't want to, whatever your agency's standard operating procedure, you're operating within that.
Yeah.
Most of them don't have strict guidelines. They usually have like a continuum, or they'll refer to a matrix or something along those lines. As long as you're within that what they have articulated and you can explain it, you're going to be okay. And it makes much more sense to inflict less harm to a person, which a taser, even though it does hurt and it sucks, it inflicts much less harm than if you're trading blows with this individual. They don't end up with broken jaws, broken orbitals. You don't end up with broken hands, because that happens a lot with cops when they're punching. So those are things that people are going, well, why'd they tase them? Well, a lot of times it's going to be a better situation for us to tase the individual versus trading punches with that person.
Yeah, and actually that's going to tie into the unarmed, but let me just reiterate something. So once again, I am not like a highly trained martial arts guy, UFC. I'm none of those things, but I have taken a ton of different types of training, defensive tactics, combat, whatever you want to call it. And I'm basically skilled enough now to know if you are way more skilled than I am. And then I immediately try to disengage and go to, I'm not going to do this with you because you're, even if you're equal. So this is going to touch on the unarmed part because this is what I want people to understand. Just because you and I are the same size, same skill set, again, if you're acting in a law enforcement capacity, you have committed a crime or believed to have committed a crime. I am detaining you or arresting you. I don't have to, it's not a fair fight. I really hate this shit in the news when it's like, oh my God, there was 10 agents or 10 cops and why do they need so many people? And they were drawing their gun. We're not trying to hurt you and we're not trying to fight with you, square up and go turf bear for bear and be like, oh, you win this time, so you get to go. No, that's not how it works. Like, you don't win. The defendant, the suspect does not win, right? You're going to, I'm acting in a law enforcement capacity. I'm going to win. And that's how it's going to be. So you touched on it. We're not, but at the same time, we're not trying to break your body and, cause all these effects and, going toe to toe and just slamming and fighting on the ground. Why would I do that when I could just tase you, pepper spray you, detain you, get you cleaned up? And again, minimal injuries.
Correct.
So
Correct.
I love that again, this is the Guardian. They had a negative slant. They're like, 83% of these people are unarmed. I'm like, no shit. Again, this is non-deadly use of force. We'll get into that too. Because again, like you said, just because you're unarmed doesn't mean somebody can't shoot you, especially if you're beating the fuck out of somebody and then you'll have them on the ground or choking them out or whatever it is. That can happen. But yes, typically if you're unarmed, cops are going to go to a taser, pepper spray, something like that. I'll give you one funny story before we get into that. I've had several in the area that I used to patrol. They'd be like, yeah, when you guys pull guns, I know you aren't going to use that. No, you're not as quick to use that, but if I see that taser with that red dot, I'm like, hell no, because I don't want to take that ride. They're like, you're much more prone to use it. So, again, I would use my gun sometimes, especially if you don't know what's going on, to stop any type of retaliation or, not trying to fight nobody. But again, not everybody listens to that. Because like, man, you're going to shoot me for this shit. But if I put that taser, like, oh, hell no, he's serious. He's going to tase the shit out of me. So a lot of times I pull it out and never use it.
Yeah.
But going to that, Mo, talk about that. We're not trying to hurt you. That's why we use the tools on our belts.
Right. And one of the things too, like you said, it's not a fair fight. I am not there to fight you.
No.
I am there to do a job. And that's all it is for me. It is just a job. There's no emotion attached to it. There's nothing like that. If I'm fighting with somebody, it's because I'm emotionally involved. I am there for a job. I got called there because you have done something that has risen to the level that my presence was required. Yep. So now that my presence is here and I legally have gone through the scenario in my head, overlaid the legal rules, the case law, the actual statutes over that situation and determined that I need to now effect an arrest, keep you from leaving, whatever it may be. Now I have to be able to do that. It is not about a fair fight. It is absolutely about how can I safely detain this person? How can I safely arrest this person? And if that requires 3 to 4 officers, then that's what it's going to require. If it requires me tasering you so that you're not going to injure me or someone else that happens to be on the scene, quite often a lot of our fights are born out of domestics. We get there, we got highly charged situations, and we've got to take control of that situation when we get there with little information in many cases. So it is not going to be, oh, well, they didn't have to put 10 people or they didn't have to. It is about me as the officer doing my job, effecting an arrest, preventing flight, whatever it may be. And the safest way a lot of times would be me and Tyler going in and making the arrest. We take the person to the ground. He takes the lower part of the person's body. I take the upper part. We hold on to them until they get tired, and then we handcuff them.
Yeah.
That's what that consists of. And that may, if the person's really fighting or you add in the factors of drugs or mental illness or any of those things like that, it might take more than just me and Tyler. It might take 4 or 5 of us to actually do that so that we're able to gain control of that situation. But no, it is not about, I used to love, and people still, I'm sure to this day, still say, I wish you took that belt off. Why?
Yeah, no.
This belt off, I'm here to do a job.
If I didn't have this belt on, I wouldn't be here.
I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't care what you were doing. So
no.
That's where that mindset, that's the mindset that the public will have a lot of times. And it's, you've got to remind yourself, guys, this is a job that we do and that we're there to do that job and do it effectively. And sometimes effective doesn't always look the way you think effective should look.
Correct. You touched on something about not going away. And I can remember quite a few times when you're showing up, you're in full uniform, hey, I need to talk to you. And there's this attitude. I think it's gotten progressively worse in my opinion. They're just going to ignore you, bypass you, act like you're talking to me. And I'm talking to you. Stop. I'm here now. You have to deal with me. And they're like, no, I don't. Yep. For everyone listening, yes, you do. Because if you try to walk away, I'm going to grab you and you're like, why are you putting hands on me and all this other shit? Because I'm going to talk to you because we're going to get to the bottom of this because now I'm here now. So whatever is happening, we're going to address it. I can't tell you how many times I had to grab somebody. And sometimes I'd grab them, handcuff them, throw them in the back seat, and then let them out. It's like, it didn't need to get to that level, but you need to talk to me because somebody has alleged the crime was committed, and I'm not going to let you just walk away. And again, this is not for witnesses and all that stuff. Although I will say on the federal side, you can put warrants out for people who don't want to show up and be a witness. I did that before. You talk about, hey, you're under arrest and you're going to jail because you don't want to show up and be a witness. It's like, oh, y'all could do that for me? I was like, yes. I was serious. I was serious when I said, get your ass over here.
That's the thing too. People realize when we're called to a scene, we have certain duties that we have to correct. So it's not that, again, I didn't pick your house out of your whole neighborhood to come and knock on your door. I got called here. So now I have certain duties that I have got to fulfill. If you take the time a lot of times to talk to me and I get to the bottom of it, there's no crime being committed. Even if I don't like what you did, it doesn't matter. I'm going to leave. I'm going to take my stuff and I'm going to be like, hey, good luck, guys. This doesn't have anything to do with me because there are limits to the power of law enforcement officers as well. And I don't have any interest in doing anything illegal, making illegal arrests or anything like that, because then that puts me in jeopardy of my livelihood. That puts me in jeopardy of going to jail if I do, make bad decisions. So if you take the time when I get there to not walk past me, to address me, and we sort through the situation, I might just leave.
Yeah.
Depending on the situation and circumstances.
No, how many times did you get called to a domestic and end up arresting the person who called? And they'll be like, but I'm the one that called you. I called you first. And it's like,
so many.
That just means you're stupid, bro. Like, what are you doing? Or man, whatever. It just depends on the nature. Yeah. It's so many times. And I'm like, again, the law is the law. And that's what I'm here to investigate it and make a determination. So anyway, I can't tell you how many times that occurred. It still makes me laugh to this day.
It does.
We were talking a little bit before, talking about use of force. Again, a lot of them do occur, both deadly and non-deadly use of force traffic stops. And I used to think it was a socioeconomic thing. It is not, because now that I've traveled all over the country. It's not. You don't know what that person's going through. You also don't know who that person is driving all the time. It's not always the registered owner or whatever. And VJ's talked about many times. He's like, you're pulling this dude over or this person over for 10 miles, 15 miles over, whatever. And you might just be giving them a warning. Well, they might have a kilo or something in the back, or they might be on a third strike or have whatever, right? So you have no idea when you're walking up. And then you see all these online internet attorneys and all this other shit with their tinted windows and they crack the window and they just slide their license. It's like, I'm not going to get into the laws of all these things. A reasonable, normal human being, a cop stops you. Nobody likes it. I get pulled over. I still don't fucking like it. It gets my adrenaline pumping. I fucking hate it. Mm-hmm. But I roll the windows down, hands on the steering wheel. They address you. They want to see you 99% of the time. I mean, it kind of depends on where you're at, I guess, but they'll give you, it depends on what you're doing. If 5, 10 miles over, they're going to give you a warning, move on about your day. But it's like this immediate, you're putting somebody, a state trooper or somebody on high alert because now you want to act like an asshole on top of the fact that you just did something shitty. But there's no reason to do that. You are almost encouraging a negative outcome.
100%. And people, remember, we're still human beings in this job. And if I pull you over, especially at night when I can't see in your vehicle, and you do things that makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck, I'm going to respond so that I can be safe. So the first thing I'm going to do is call for another unit. I'm going to call for additional units because now I feel unsafe in that situation. I'm not saying that we get into this job with the expectation that what we do is a safe job, but we try to do as safely as possible. So if you roll your window down and I can see in your car, that makes me feel so much better. I can tell you, me personally, I have high clearance SUV with darker windows in the back. I'll roll those down too so they can see the back of the car and be like, hey,
this is what's going on here.
It's immediately going to kind of bring them down because traffic stops are the most dangerous thing that we do, right up there with domestic stuff. Yep. Those are so volatile because we don't know who we're stopping. They know who we are. We don't know who they are. We don't know what their mindset is or where they're at. And not even talking about them doing something illegal. I think in one of the episodes, BJ referenced the fact of that straw that broke the camel's back. Was this traffic stop going to be the straw that broke this person, like that broke their back at this point? Yeah. They've had just a compiling of things going on. So there's a lot of things that you can do to help when we pull you over by making that law enforcement officer feel a little more comfortable. And we are humans. We understand that we do have bad days. If I pull you over and you're having a bad day, tell me that too. Sorry, ma'am, I'm having a bad day. Fair enough. I'll get you out of here as quick as I can. I'll tell you why I stopped you. I will tell you on the reverse side, cops, we have a duty also to not be jerks just because we can. One of the things that drives me nuts is when people will say, why'd you stop me? I'll tell you in a minute. Give me your stuff. Why? Just tell them.
Yeah, this is why I stopped you.
Listen, I used to walk up and say, hey, Deputy so-and-so, this is why I stopped you. You ran that stop sign back there, so I pulled you over for that. Do you have your license, registration, proof, insurance? Now, if they were one of those people who want to try to make, square off with me, I've taken the wind out of their sails right from the very beginning by telling them all the information up front.
Yep.
Now they don't really have a leg to stand on. So there's a two-way street is what I'm getting at, where we can make situations that are not comfortable for anybody be as comfortable as we possibly can make them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, again, I'm trying to reference my own personal experience. People have all kinds of different things going on. Cars broke, their windows broken, their doors broken. They're trying to open their back, it looks squirrely when you're walking up, and then they're like, hey, I'm sorry, my door's broken, my window, again, but they are addressing why they're doing this unusual behavior. I mean, I'm even laughing because, not to name drop, but whatever, Dan Bongino, he was talking, he drives an armored car. He got stopped, and you can't roll the windows down, so he cracked the door open and had his hand, but again, he had his hands out, and he was trying to explain, hey, it's an armored car, I can't roll the windows down. And the guy's like, what the? He's like, again, he explained why he was doing this unusual behavior. Again, trying to fully cooperate. That's all. I just don't understand this need and desire to just automatically go straight offensive or defensive when dealing with law enforcement, especially if it's a standard. This is what the cops do. I hate traffic stops. I hate getting stopped. I think it's one of the biggest reasons people hate cops, in my personal opinion. Nobody likes that shit. I hate it when you see them out there running speed and stuff like that at 8 in the morning. It's like, dude, everyone's trying to go to work, go to school, whatever the hell. It's like, these are not the people you need to be going at, in my opinion. That's my personal opinion. Everyone's got a job to do. I get it. We can go on and on about it. BJ and I argue about this stuff to this day, but there's no reason for immediate animosity.
No. And if you can, again, make those situations that are super uncomfortable a little bit more comfortable for everybody, that's going to automatically diminish the use of force.
Yeah.
The ability for things to escalate, the ability for the officer to feel like they need to take more control over the situation. Those kind of things will go down, and therefore there's a less likely chance that there is a use of force unless you get some rogue, crazy officer, which there aren't as many of those out there as you believe. I think my theory has always been, I feel like we have people who are undertrained for all the things they have to encounter in these cases, and that undertraining causes them to sometimes make bad decisions or do things that aren't in line with what you should be doing in those scenarios. So the rogue officers, are there some out there? Absolutely there are. But I think the numbers are a lot lower than maybe the public perceives a lot of times.
Well, and also, I agree with that 100%. Again, I've never come across it, and I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of different law enforcement officials in all over the world. I never saw it again. I don't know everybody's deep personal feelings or their heart, but I tend to agree with you. But also for people who have never gone through law enforcement training, Mo, you as an instructor, how many videos does a cadet see? And also, your annual training, your continuing training where they show, hey, look, this is what's going on. You got sovereign citizens that are busting out AKs, shooting cops at traffic stops. Here's a traffic stop where the dude got out and started beating the shit out of this other cop. This cop got hit by I mean, you are inundated with these are all the things that can go wrong. 98% of all traffic stops are going to be unconsequential, just go on about, you won't even remember that you stopped the person. But that 2% could take your life. And so, but cops, they focus on the 2% because like you said, they want to go home too.
Yeah. Because the 2% can go so bad. That's why.
Real bad.
So when I told you we're giving them information through a fire hose, we are giving them all of the information that is required by state statute to provide them with, but we are also inundating them with life experiences that we've all experienced. And I can tell you as an instructor, we're not in there telling them, hey, this one time I went to a house, the people were like, hey, you want to come in and have a slice of cake while you're here? I'm not telling those stories because they're not consequential. We talk to them about the things where there were consequences that we sustained or consequences that another officer sustained or something somebody did wrong. We're going to tell them about all those things in an effort to the effort behind it is like we're a big brother or a big sister trying to help them not make the same mistakes that we did. So we don't inundate them with all the bad stuff. That's the reality. So that first year of them getting out there, they're shell shocked and they're probably a little nervous.
Yeah. Well, and also, again, personal experience. Again, everyone has bad days, including cops, but I can't tell you how many times, I hope it's not a lot. I'm just remembering a few, but where I just got done, working on a kid that committed suicide or a domestic or a traffic fatality where the family's dead in the car, burned up alive or whatever. And again, you still have to finish your shift. And so that happened 30, 40 minutes ago, and now I'm pulling you over because you ran a red light and you just giving me all kinds of attitude and calling me all the different kinds of names. I'm going to verbally assault you because it's like, dude, I just got done dealing, because again, my emotional state, I haven't recovered from it yet. That's a different topic for a different day. But again, it's not even just rogue officers, but it's like, you don't know what that officer is going through either. He could be going through a divorce. His kids could be doing some fucked up shit. Who knows, right? You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And you're going to throw all this attitude for him doing his job.
Yeah. As much as we want to say like, hey, when you come to work, all that stuff's going to stay at home. We're human. That's really the reality of it. We're human. We can try to compartmentalize, but there are things that are going to bring things bubbling to the surface. And that call where you pulled that baby out of the pool that was drowned, and then you immediately, like you said, you have to go finish your shift. Agencies are getting a little bit better, I think, with recognizing like, hey, we might need to pull that person off the road, but not all of them, and that's the realities of what they're encountering daily.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like we dug into the car stop stuff, but I definitely agree. But I want to get into the racial disparity slant of the Guardian report on use of force. And you and I were talking about a little bit, but I kind of just want to bounce back and forth. It's unfortunate that this is the state of things right now in the U.S. I tend to lean towards that it's more socioeconomic. It's not necessarily a white-black thing. It's trailer parks, hoods, whatever. It doesn't matter. You tend to deal with a more heightened state of individual for various reasons, whatever it might be. And also the types of crimes. We were talking about the types of crimes. Because if you're getting arrested for fraud or, embezzlement, those are typically white collar crimes. Those are handled very differently than your typical domestic or drug use or drunkenness or whatever it is. Those are different types of crimes. They're not as, again, the penalties could be just as severe, if not more severe, but the way they're handled is very different. And then also how the political climate affects populations in reacting to law enforcement. But I wanted to bounce that to you.
Yeah, I would say I agree with you 100% when it comes to, it's not race, it's definitely socioeconomic levels. We are the communities that are a little more socioeconomically challenged, we typically will deal with them in different arenas because unfortunately the neighborhoods that have the lower socioeconomic levels will have drugs. So now you have drug crimes inserted in there. They'll have robberies. They'll have shootings a little bit more just because with surrounding drugs, it kind of brings those things in there. There are other crimes that we deal with regularly that transcends all socioeconomic levels. We were talking about domestics. You're going to go to people in $1 million homes that are having domestics, and you're going to go to people who are homeless that are having domestics.
Yep.
And the level of stress and anxiety that creates for an officer is the exact same no matter what house I walk into. So I feel like a lot of times people think that, oh, this is why, cops are making decisions based on this reason or that reason. It's just based on the totality of what we're having to deal with. And I think often we're seeing in communities that have less money is what it boils down to, because I always used to say, people got to eat. So they're gonna sell drugs if they got to feed themselves or their families. They're gonna steal if they got to feed themselves or their families. People got to eat at the end of the day, and that is where we get wrapped into situations where this individual, this is how they're living because they've got to survive, and this is what survival looks like to them. And unfortunately, survival, when it crosses into legalities, is going to collide with law enforcement, and therefore we are going to be the bad guys at that point.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to go this direction, but it's something I'm thinking about. What's the Avila? I can't remember the high end area in Tampa. I think it's called Avila.
Avila, Cheval. We got a couple different ones.
Yeah, I mean, $10-15 million homes, whatever. I don't know. I might be over exaggerating, but whatever. They'll have private security and all this other stuff. It's a whole thing. But from my experience, they tend to be more embarrassed that you're even there. Like they are super embarrassed. They had to call you to deal with whatever's going on, domestic, their kids, drugs, whatever it is. And also keep in mind, we've had officer involved shootings in that area. We've had murders in that area. We had, the one that sticks out is the husband that killed his whole family and himself. And then fireworks was set fire to his house. I mean, there's still wild shit that goes on. So again, the crimes are crimes, but they tend to be more embarrassed and ashamed that they had to call you. Whereas when you roll into lower level income areas, trailer parks, whatever it is, and again, not to keep handing on them, but you don't get the same level of embarrassment. They're just, people will come out of their houses. It's almost like it's a show. It's entertainment that you're there. I can remember kicking in some door from, I can't remember where it was in Bravo 3. The fishbowl area, and I kicked it one time, and I heard somebody go 1, and I kicked it again, and then like 8 people said 2. They're counting how many times it took me to kick the door, and I'm like, what's happening? I was looking around like, they were just inside listening. So it's almost like a form of entertainment, maybe because they've just been so desensitized, but I think that leads to kind of what you're talking about.
I agree. I think desensitization, them being desensitized is absolutely part of it. I think it's also when you go to the lower income neighborhoods, they just kind of get used to, okay, this is what happens. And it's just part of it. Whereas I think that people who live in the higher incomes, and it's not even super high, like the super rich, you go into some of our areas that are just somewhat affluent, and they feel like they don't want their neighbors to know this, or they don't want this, or they don't want that. And so I will tell you, for that reason, I don't think there's such a huge disparity in crime. I just don't think they call us until it gets to a level that it's spilled out where they don't have a choice to. Because it seemed, for me, you get a lot of like BS calls in the lower income neighborhoods that are like, okay, this isn't really a crime. I understand that you're upset about this, but this isn't really a crime. The calls that you get in Avila, like you said, the guy killed his whole family, or the guy is holding his, like one of the calls that my husband went out on in one of the affluent neighborhoods here. The guy was holding his whole family hostage and shooting at deputies when they pulled up. So when it gets bad, it is bad when you go into these neighborhoods. I just think that the smaller crimes, because the idea of, I don't want my neighbors to see that my home is out of control, or it has to get really bad before they call. Whereas the neighborhoods that are a little more economically challenged are more apt to call us and be like, hey, I need this worked out, because again, I always say it goes in line with survival. I can't deal with this problem because I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to eat tomorrow.
Yeah. I gotta listen. You remind me of stuff. Sorry, again, I keep jumping in, but again, lower income areas. I've been into some homes that I'm like, I can't talk to you in here because there's fucking cockroaches. It's like you've never heard of a trash can. There's human shit and dog. Like it was a fucking nightmare. And then literally next door, same complex, next door neighbor is spotless, and it's somebody who just works. And this is what they've chosen to take care of their place. So again, just because you live in lower income, it doesn't mean you have to live like that or be involved in those things. But also, you just reminded me, I remember this was in the Alpha 5. I'm trying to remember the complex. I can't remember these complexes. It doesn't matter. But we got a call, and there was probably 300 people chasing this car. And there was a dude hanging out at the passenger side window, beating the fuck out of the driver. I had no idea what was going on. I show up, I pull in front of the car, it stops. I immediately drag the passenger out, handcuff him. The whole crowd goes, no, it's not him. It's the driver. It's the whole crowd. But they all kept their space. I pull the driver out. I handcuff him too because I have no idea what's going on. I separate the two. And come to find out, the driver was driving around this majority black area screaming racial stuff. He was drunk. Basically inciting a riot. He hit like 5 or 6 people's cars. He was screaming and yelling, throwing stuff. He ends up getting arrested. I released the guy from the passenger car, and not from my actions, but he had like his ankle was hurt or whatever. And I'm like, hey man, let me get you an ambulance, whatever. He's like, hey, I totally understand. I'm glad you got the right guy. I shouldn't have jumped in there, but you should have heard the shit he was saying. He hit my car. He almost hit my baby. But anyway, at the end of it, everybody was like, thank you. Like they were thanking us for doing our job. But in that moment, it could have gone bad real quick because they saw me drag the guy in the passenger window out first. But again, this is what I see when I pull up. I'm like, he's wailing on this dude hanging out the window. So it doesn't always mean low income, they hate cops. That's not true. When you take a problem out of the neighborhood, they appreciate that.
100%. 100%. So that's where, I will tell you too, I'm always very wary of statistics because I feel like based on whoever is conducting the studies can use statistics to be one way or the other. So when you're talking about racial disparities and things like that, they can make the numbers say a lot of times what they want them to say in many cases, one way or the other. And especially depending on what numbers are you using? Are you combining deadly force and non-deadly force? What are you, and what is being marked off as non-deadly force? Some agencies will count use of force if I have to take somebody an escort position. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Other agencies will say, oh no, it's a use of force if you take the person to the ground. So that's where I say these studies, I really do look at them in a grain of salt. I think we just have to, as a community, law enforcement community, we have to be open to hear, open to recognize if we do have a problem, own it, and take corrective actions. And as a community, because the civilian community, you are part of our community as well, and law enforcement is part of yours, that you have to own your piece of the pie as well, and then figure out how can we as a community work well together, because we have to. Law enforcement can't go away, because for all the people who want to say that they wouldn't want cops, I would love to understand what you think that would look like if you did not have law enforcement as part of your society.
Correct. And I'll add on to 2 things. One, I could tell you for a fact, San Francisco, every time they arrest somebody, meaning handcuffs go on them, that they have to fill out a use of force sheet or template or whatever. I'm like, even if they just turn around, they're like, yes, it doesn't matter. Every single arrest gets reviewed. I'm like, good God, you're just bogging the system down. And then I also, again, I try to not get too political on here, but New York is an example where they're arresting people for violent crimes, and they could give 2 shits, and they disrespect the cops. They'll fight cops. They don't give a shit because they know they're gonna have a no cash bill. They'll be right back out sometimes within the same day, because we go to New York all the time, and they were explaining like it's just out of fucking control, and like the subway jumpers and all that stuff like that. Like 10 years ago, they would arrest you and like it was a big deal. They weren't doing it. Now it's just like they're like, dude, we're dealing with murders and people getting burned and raped and pushed on. Like we don't have time to deal with that. So there has to be some sort of understanding and symbiotic relationship between the politics of what's going on and how to keep your city safe, and then also the implementation of that.
100%. 100%.
But Mo, I don't want to get too bogged down because we had some other stuff talking about. I wanted to get into problematic recruits and the lack of consequences that you've been seeing that I can also speak to as well.
100%.
This is during training.
When I say, yeah, during training, I would say, and the reason why I think this is an important topic to hit on is when we're talking use of force, this is such a thing that we cannot nail down exactly how to tell you to do it when you're out on the street. Like I said, I can't give you a checklist. I can't say, Tyler, when you go to a call, if you tell somebody this, then and you check that off and they do this is what your next. It's not like that. I can give you an idea of how to handle situations and how to take the law, how to take your SOPs, how to take your case law, how to take the information you're getting from your legal department and overlay it in that real life situation. But it's hard for me to truly tell you how you're going to handle every single situation. The way we try to do things is by putting them in scenarios and giving them an opportunity to think through those scenarios with little direction so that it mimics somewhat of what they're going to encounter in the real world. Yeah. The problematic part I see when we have done it, though, is for Florida specifically, scenario training. There is some scenario training built into the curriculum. And when we put them through the scenarios, if they make mistakes, we will counsel them in that scenario. We'll say, hey, that wasn't the right way to handle it. And then we send them on. There's not a pass fail. There's not a reset. There's not a, hey, this person might need to be remediated. There's not a built out framework for doing that. There are some training centers that have a way of addressing it, but there's not a way for us to say, hey, this person should not be put through and showing as completed the academy successfully because of this, the way they reacted in this scenario. And I say all that to say some scenarios that I have gone through and I have seen where these are scenarios where I felt like the individual should have been set back. We have a scenario that we would do, and it was, I would play a bad guy a lot of times. And it would be, I would have a warrant and I'm super compliant right up until they tell me I have a warrant. And at that point, the whole idea behind the scenario was if they would put hands on me, I would immediately give up and allow them to handcuff me. If they got over the hurdle of actually putting hands on me. We had another scenario that was very similar where if they put hands on me, I would immediately start fighting just to get them into a DT scenario. But this one was just getting them to the hump of putting their hands on me. Yep. And I cannot tell you how many times in that scenario where I would walk them around their car, I'd walk them around my car, I would tell them that I'm not going to go to jail today, and I would square off with them, and they would just stand there and look at me. And they could, the scenario would go on so long that we'd have to stop it eventually and say, all right, what are you going to do? Well, she's not turning around. Well, sometimes people aren't. They're not always going to just turn around and put their hands behind their back. So what are you going to do when that happens? If you allow them to do what I did to you, I've had scenarios where I walked them around my car, got back in my car and drove off.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And grant you, it's a scenario, so there's no consequence to it. But my thing is that is a huge, you got to look at that as to this is how this person is going to react. This is a scenario where they knew they weren't going to get hurt. They know that there are parameters that keep them safe in this scenario and they couldn't get over that hump. What happens when you put them into a real world scenario where all of those protections are off? Do you think they're going to put hands on people? Or do you think they're going to, at that point, out of fear, escalate to something on their belt that they probably shouldn't go to?
Yeah.
That's the good possibility. Another scenario I had where we had a cadet, this was a shoot scenario. And just to kind of give you an overview, it was a scenario where it's a domestic. The two parties are arguing. One of the two parties is armed with a hidden gun. When they go to, if the two parties will get into a physical fight, when they do, the gun changes hands, and then at that point, a gunfight ensues. The idea is they're supposed to engage with deadly force. Bad guy will go down as soon as he's hit. And in the scenario, this guy, or cadet, I'm pretty sure it was a male cadet, but he shoots the bad guy, turns and shoots the other party that was involved. And I was a safety officer. So for us, our safety officers wear red. So I was wearing the proper safety gear. was standing in the same spot I had been standing to observe the scenario the entire time. He turns, I had my arm up on the wall, and he shoots me, thankfully not square in the chest, but he hits me in my bicep, mid bicep, probably 3 feet away on bare skin with a sim round. It felt like I had been shot.
That's what hurts.
Shot feels like, because I haven't been, but I still have a permanent scar from that scenario. And when asked, what were you thinking? Why did you shoot all those people? His answer was, I don't know. And
my God.
He went completely code black. He was not thinking. So he, out of fear, shot everybody in the scenario, essentially. That, to me, was serious enough that we should stop. His training should stop, and we should have to go back and do some more training with him. There should be a framework where I can say, he doesn't have to get kicked out, but we got to do some reset and do some more training. And then we've got to put him in the scenario again and see if his reaction changes. Because if it doesn't, now I feel like there's some liability to turn somebody like that out onto the street.
Yeah.
So,
and actually, I have a question for you, because, again, I've never been a trainer, so I like to just reiterate that. You need to be able to make mistakes in training. That's what training is for.
Yes.
That's why you figure it out. You've never done this before. You have no idea what you're doing. You need to be able to make mistakes. But at what point do you cross the line? Well, I don't know, either as an individual or as an agency, and be like, yo, this dude or whatever, this individual is a liability. Like, what would it take for someone not to make it? In training only, not crimes and shit. I've seen that, but I've seen people get arrested in class because they were out there stealing shit. But whatever. That actually happened at Hillsborough.
They would typically fail tests. That would wash them out. Test failures are the big ones.
Yeah.
That washes most people out. When we're talking about the scenario-based training, even the scenarios that are warranted, that FDLE has us, where we read it and it's exactly from it's the exact scenario that they have laid out. If the person doesn't do well in it, it is just feedback. That's all we do, is we give them feedback. So when we're talking about a scenario, there's not the other thing. Well, let me back up. Also, firearms, that I've seen people get washed out because of firearms mishandling.
Yeah.
On the range, mishandling of a firearm, pointing your firearm at people, being unsafe. I've seen people get washed out for that as well. And I personally have been part of a cadet being washed out because of those kinds of scenarios. But when we're talking about a scenario-based training, I have not seen a cadet get washed out solely because of the fact of they're handling these scenarios and that is indicative to their future behavior. I've not seen them do that. And I think that's a fair leap to make.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think. I don't think so in Hillsborough, a guy got, washed/arrested. He stole a bunch of money from an ATM prior to coming to training, whatever.
That's a problem.
So that's a problem. State police, a guy got washed out because he lied. He lied to the instructors about tests he took or something like that. And basically they're like, yeah, you're a liar. You're done. Secret Service, 2 people got washed out for shooting. But I think that was at Fletchy, so I can't remember if they were Secret Service or not. Anyway, they from shooting, they could not pass the minimum qualifications.
Right.
Well, and then again, I was washed out from the FBI because they didn't like my push-ups. So, but again, I don't think anyone's ever been washed out because of a training simulation, to my knowledge. I mean, again, I'm not an instructor, but I'm just thinking.
And I agree. Training is where you do make your mistakes. I want you to make your mistakes in training. I just think that there needs to be a threshold as to how egregious is the mistake. And and I'm not saying that, again, that should be an end all be all. I think there should be some remediation that takes place. And it should be formalized. It shouldn't be just, hey, sidebar talking. It needs to be a formalized remediation plan. Just like if you fail out in firearms, for instance, we have a formalized remediation plan. We have to put the person through. We have to document it. We have to do all those things.
Yeah.
I feel like when you're talking about these scenarios that are life and death scenarios, shoot, don't shoot scenarios where the person is showing cowardice, those kinds of scenario-based training, there should be a formal remediation plan that we put that individual through to take the corrective action and get them where they need to be. Because I think we're doing them an injustice when we just send them, we give them a little bit of feedback and we send them out to the world, because I don't think it really weighs on them or carries the weight that it should for them when they go out because they think, well, I passed, I'm good to go.
Yeah. And so I'll jump into my two stories. These are both from the Secret Service. I won't use names, but kind of leading into what you were talking about, because I wanted to get into the other stories that you would talk about with recruits and deciphering that. But this is a training scenario. The first one was a buddy of mine, love him to death, still love him. He's actually a great agent. But again, he'd never been a cop, never been in law enforcement. And unfortunately, or fortunately for him, he was in a class full of cops, military guys. And in Secret Service, you would go through your training scenario, but the whole class would watch you. Like, well, basically, if you went first, nobody watched you. But as you finished the scenario, you stayed in the room and watched. And the scenario was, hey, the president of the United States is coming down this hallway in 5 minutes. There's a protester sitting here peacefully, not compliant, but not fighting you, not doing it, just sitting. They just want to protest. You need to move them. The purpose was to basically use your DT tactics, get them to stand up and to escort them away. So the way I did it, because they were like, they're rushing you. They're like, oh, it's 2 minutes out. You got to hurry this up. He's got to get whatever. I just put the dude up and carried him out of the room. They're like, all right, we got it. You know, this is what we were looking for, but I guess it works. My buddy, and unfortunately for him, he was last. So the whole classroom was in there watching him. He's giving this guy commands. He's trying to lift him up. The guy's just sitting there. Again, he's just sitting there. He's like, they're rushing him. Hey, he's 45 seconds out. You got to make a decision. You got to do it. He pulls out his baton and just starts wailing on this motherfucker. It just starts beating the shit. We're laughing, but they're like, they then made it real serious. Like, this is a civilian and you're just going to beat the shit out of him on camera, like, because the president's walking by. Like, anyway.
Gee.
Yeah, again, great agent. But now I'm going to jump to the next one. And this is more what I was leaning towards with, like, at what point do you say, yo, this is a fucking problem? And I'll leave gender out of it because, again, it doesn't matter. I know this person personally. This recruit in training, so entry-level training with the Secret Service, you do what's called rope line. So it's like, hey, the protectee's in the middle. You're working down the rope line. They're shaking hands, kissing babies. And the purpose is, hey, somebody from the crowd pulls a firearm and you have to, there's all these things. You have to protect the protectee, get them out of there, but then the remaining agency to address the threat in a crowd of people and blah, blah, blah. You get the concept.
Right.
So the recruit's going through there's like 6 agents online. Gun is called. They get the protectee out. The remaining agents pull their guns. This recruit turns and starts shooting the agents beside him.
Oh my. And
they were like, whoa. You're killing. And the recruit was like, I thought it was like an insider threat thing. They're just killing indiscriminately because I never saw the gun. So that was one. They walked the person through it. Fast forward like 6 years going, because you have to go through training again when you go on to the detail. Same exact scenario. Person does the exact same thing again. That person is right now on the presidential detail. Like, to me, like, at what point do you go, yo, this is insane. Nobody's safe. You're going to shoot your fellow agents. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, whoa, that one's that's a lot to digest. But again, this is what I'm saying. Like, in this type of scenario, it wasn't once, it was twice. So that's demonstrated behavior. So this individual has explained to you or shown you how they're going to respond in those situations. So now if put in a real world situation they do, what are the repercussions? And I'm not saying this individual should be fired, but I would fathom to say there should be documented remediation. Yeah. There should be in classroom remediation. There should be walking through that scenario. There should be talking through that scenario. There should be something to show the evolution of trying to get this person over this decision-making hurdle that they're at, and they keep making the same decision. And if they can't demonstrate a different behavior, now we've got to look at, there should be formalized ways of separating, because now this person is a danger. In my opinion, as an agent, I don't want to serve with that person.
Correct.
I wouldn't.
And I can imagine, I can fathom to believe that the people that this individual works with don't know that. Don't know that that's what happened. Not once, but twice.
That's wild. And these are two different, obviously training programs that we're talking about, but I think that is a good bit of how training is handled
Yeah.
with individuals. Instead of going time out, we need to have this in place to take corrective action. And we need to have this in place to say, maybe this isn't the job for you. I've always been one to tell the cadets when we're teaching, if you at any point think this is not the job for you, or if I tell you, listen, this is the demonstrated behavior you're showing, and this is why I don't think this is what you're cut out to be, it is not me because I don't like you. It is not a personal thing. It is an idea that I want to keep you safe and all the individuals that happen to be working with you, all the public that may encounter you. Those are the things that I am looking at when I tell you that.
Yeah. Wow. But I wanted to jump into the examples that you gave to your recruits about good shoot, bad shoot, because I wanted to talk about it as well.
Yeah, I always say too, when we're training these situations, because I can't again give you a checklist, I would say the thing that I think is important to the public is to understand that perception is everything when it comes to law enforcement. When it's the perception of what you guys perceive that we're doing, but it's also the perception of what I, as the law enforcement officer, saw at the moment that I made whatever decision to use force or not use force, or use not less lethal force, or to use deadly force. That's where, going back to what I said at the very beginning, how it is so important for me as the officer, you as the officer, to be able to articulate and explain why I made the decision that I made, why it's ethical, what I saw in that moment, what were my feelings, what were my fears, to talk about all those things rolled up, because we look at things as a totality of circumstances when we're evaluating it. When we are evaluating it, the court looks at it as a totality of circumstances as well. So the more you can explain your mindset, what you saw, what you heard, what you felt in those situations, the easier it is for them to be able to make decisions. So that leads into, we talk a lot in the classroom about shoot, don't shoot scenarios. And I always say we're not Monday morning quarterbacking these officers, but we do need to look at situations that unfolded. And we have the beauty of body cams and all these things nowadays that we can look at and say, what could we have done differently? What should we have done differently? Was this a good shoot? Was this not a good shoot? There are times where the public will evaluate and say, that was awful. They shot this person 15 times and that was terrible. Well, let me give you a scenario where 15 times is understood because of the way neurologically our brain works, because of the situation. There was a female officer, and it doesn't matter, again, sex doesn't matter, female officer in Napa, California. And that area that she was in was very rural. So she's out in the middle of nowhere, essentially. I know people usually associate California with Hollywood and lots of buildings and there's a lot of rural parts of California as well. Yeah. So she's on patrol. She pulls over a vehicle, and the driver is acting really sketchy, like we were talking about, cracking his window, being really kind of all over the place. She's trying to ask him, like, what's going on? Who, me? You're talking to me? Like, very evasive with answering the questions. She is standing at his driver's side window, a little bit offset. So she's standing more towards the back seat of the driver's side. And all of a sudden he comes up with something. And at first glance, you can't really tell what he comes up with. She retreats immediately and then comes around to the passenger side and starts shooting. At that point, you do know what's happened, because she was calm enough and had enough wit about her to get on the radio and say, shots fired, shots fired. And then at that point, she returns fire. Well, she shoots 15 times in that time frame. It took that time, though, for your brain to recognize, oh, gosh, because when they slowed the video down, he shot at her, and he manages to barely miss hitting her in the face, essentially. Because you see the round and the fire come out of the weapon from her camera angle. She then retreats and then goes around to the passenger side to engage him, because he is still armed. And it takes that amount of time. It is within a couple seconds that she offloads 15 rounds. You could argue and say, well, why did she shoot those many rounds? It takes that time for your brain to recognize, I've been shot at. I need to protect myself. I need to return fire. He's still moving. Okay, now he's stopped. In that time, 15 rounds have gone off. So many times when you look at this situation, the totality of circumstances, she is alone in a rural area at night conducting a traffic stop, and this person has shot at her. You take all those things into effect, and she then has to articulate and explain, I was in fear for my life. She says all those things. 15 rounds is not an issue at that point.
Correct.
Flip side, I have another video I would show them, and it shows an officer who is off duty. He is working essentially a strip mall, but it has a Lowe's and a Walmart. It has big box stores that are in this particular strip mall. And the video picks up from actually the parking lot cameras. And you see him walking next to a guy who is in a motorized wheelchair. This incident occurred in Tucson, Arizona, and he worked prior to. He no longer works for Tucson Police Department, but he's very calmly giving updates to the dispatcher. Yeah, this guy, he shoplifted over, and I want to say, I think it was Walmart. And right there in front of me, he brandished a knife to the loss prevention person as we were leaving out. We're walking across the parking lot now. So they're sending him a backup. They are headed towards the Lowe's. And he tells the guy, hey man, don't go in the Lowe's. At no point does he say, and you can see the video, the guy doesn't have the knife in his hand any longer. He's just heading towards the Lowe's. In my opinion, he's trying to get away in the video, it looks like, and that's strictly my opinion. Don't hold me to it.
Yep.
So his partner pulls up, gets out, and he says to her, yeah, he's got a knife. And he is now headed towards the garden center of Lowe's. There's nobody in the garden center. The cop is still walking next to him. I won't say there's nobody in the garden center. There's nobody standing at the doorway of the garden center. He tells him again, hey, bud, don't go in the Lowe's. And as the guy starts up the ramp, he pulls his gun out and he shoots him 9 times. The partner, you can see now at this point, her body cam has come on. She never shoots a single round. She just stands there and watches, and then she holsters and says, I'm going to go get my eye pack, which I assume is going to be something that helps like quick clotting or something like that.
Yeah.
The guy was armed with a knife. I'm not arguing that, but there was so much time and evolution and other things that I feel like you could have done in that situation other than shoot the individual 9 times.
Yeah.
And you had to look again at the totality of the circumstances. The guy's in a motorized wheelchair. You're walking right next to him through a whole parking lot. You allowed him to get to that point where he was. Could you have tased him in that situation if you were concerned about him entering the Lowe's? This was a situation, and I will tell you, not always. Knives are deadly force.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. In this situation, though, the totality of the circumstances, it was not a deadly force situation. There were other options that could have been available, that were available to this individual officer in this individual circumstance. So I try to do my best to show these scenarios to them, to show that even with the pressures of the public, the officer that shoots 15 times could be completely justified based on the totality of the circumstances versus the officer who shoots. If he would have shot this man 1 time, I think the totality of the circumstances still dictated that it wasn't necessary.
Yeah. Being in a wheelchair, it changes the fact pattern, in my opinion. But
100%.
I wanted to just, there's so much, and again, I know you've seen a lot of it, and again, a lot of it's shown in training, but again, when you're in training to become a law enforcement officer, and I'm pretty sure this is standard across the United States, but you see so many different scenarios with officer-involved shootings, quick ones, officers that are calm. You see officers that are kind of freaking out, getting shot at with a rifle, and they're like on radio calling for help and dispatch, and it's like at no point do they ever fire, and then they get shot a bunch of times, and then you hear them, hey, call my wife, tell her I love her, I'm not gonna make it. That shit sticks with you, man. I mean, and that's sometimes what you're thinking about when these scenarios occur. And then you've seen not as many, but I remember in Florida for a little while, there was a slew of not just Hillsborough, but all across Florida, because I just remember seeing the videos and the upticks, but of young teenagers getting shot by cops because they were playing with guns that looked just like other guns. And again, cop gets called, 911, there's somebody with a gun walking around Walmart, walking with a gun around the park, walking with a gun around my neighborhood. Guy pulls up, it's a young teenage boy typically, and they point the gun at the officer going, ha, bang, bang, and the officer shoots him. Yeah. I can't say here Monday morning quarterback that I don't know how I would react either if you see some young person, but like, again, they just get obliterated and shredded in the media and the public. There's this outcry, but it's at the same time, we are human beings too. We have families we want to go home to. And I can tell you, to this day, I don't know how I would react if some young looking individual had a gun pointed at me would I shoot first? I don't know. I like to say yes, but I don't know, right? These are things that go through a cop's brain.
Yeah.
And then God help you if you have the opportunity with a knife, again, let's leave the motorized wheelchair out of it, goes in and starts stabbing people and you didn't do anything, you're going to be obliterated as well. Your career's over. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah,
there's just so much that goes into it.
there is. And that's why, I think that's why the courts look at it from a totality of circumstances position. And we have to look at it from that because, it's totally different. If that guy is mobile and he's walking around, that changes the game. That's a game changer. The fact that he's in a motorized wheelchair that limited his mobility, that was the game changer.
Correct.
The same thing, like I started this conversation with perspective for law enforcement officers. Perspective is everything. I do not have time to determine age. I don't have time to determine if that gun is real or not. Unfortunately, shame on these toy makers or companies that are making guns that look so realistic, the airsoft guns and things like that I can't determine. Thank you for doing that.
Well, actually, I think we used to work together when we would get the briefs because there was so much clapback that there was creating hesitancy for officers to draw their firearm that actual criminals, gangbangers and stuff like that were painting the tips of their real guns like neon, like different colors.
Yeah.
The hot paint, whatever. There's color, Cerakote color. You can do whatever you want because they wanted you to hesitate. Like, is that real or not? And then they would shoot them,
right,
or at least shoot at them. And so again, these are stuff that like the average human being walking around doesn't think about that shit because they're like, I don't think about that. Well, actually, that leads me to my next point. Then the Secret Service, everyone goes through metal detectors, all this other stuff. Well, we would get inundated with, hey, there's all these hard plastic shivs, knives. There's cell phone guns that look just like a cell phone, but there's like 2 little 22s and you can forward out and now it's a real gun. And people try to sneak this stuff into venues all the time. And so it leads to a certain level of heightened awareness where someone's like, hey, what is that? Why has that person got that in their hand? You're smacking stuff out of their hand and it's just a pen or a pencil, which could also be a weapon in the right hands. But anyway, like, oh my God, you're so aggressive. It's like they're not made aware of the nature of all the threats that not just law enforcement, but that are out there for individuals. I mean, there's fucking razor blade hair berets now where you can put them in your hand. It's a razor blade.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. There's a lot goes into what we are encountering out there. I remember one of the big things when I was on the street still was belt buckles that could turn into knives. So you have to be super careful when you're dealing with individuals that way. There has to be a level to permit law enforcement officers to protect themselves. I have to be afforded, and I say this to the public that doesn't do this job, you have to afford us the opportunity when there is a shoot to do the proper investigations, to figure out if what was perceived was actually makes it a shooting scenario that should have occurred, or that the average officer in the same situation would have done the same thing, because that's really the guideline it has to be based on, not the guy who's never done this job. It has to be based on the fact of the average officer in that same situation, would they have reacted the same way? Yeah. And that goes into that totality of circumstances. Like I said, I don't have time to evaluate age when I'm dealing with a situation. I don't have time to try to figure out if it's a gun. And I don't know my reaction if I'm looking at a 7 or 8 year old with what appears to be a gun. I don't know how I would react. Yeah. But if I'm looking at a teenage kid that could be a young adult, that's gonna change, because the 7 or 8 year old, the hesitancy from that one would be the thought that a 7 or 8 year old, are they really trying to harm me? Yeah. But a young adult, the assumption is they are, and that gun is real, and I'm going to react accordingly. And that's where there has to be some affording to look at the situation and the totality of those circumstances, and evaluate what would a reasonable officer have done in that same situation. And that's where this kind of leads into one of the other things we talked about, is that having the civilian review boards and those people come in and look at what it is that we're doing. Yeah. I said I'm not a big fan of them, but I think, like you said, there has to be some training behind it. They need to be put in these situations, even if we are talking about putting them in one of those simulator situations where it's 360 around them, and make them realize how quick these decisions have to be made, because more often than not, they shoot people that we don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because they get scared. Yeah. Well, and that's again product of training. It's not. I mean, it is out there, but I can't imagine anybody not in law enforcement is going to go look at training videos for funsies. But there's videos showing like, hey, a dude's 25 feet away from you with a knife. When do you shoot? And they show that in like 2 seconds, that guy's on you. They can sometimes get on you before you even pull your gun out. Also, suicide, people walk around with a gun next to their head. Like, they can easily just turn it towards you. I mean, split less than a second, they can fire a round at you faster than you could fire around at them. So there's all these things that they try to put you through. Low lighting comes into effect. And I'm reminded of, I think it was in Atlanta, there was an individual armed robbery suspect, high-speed chase, dude jumps out, he's running to a gas station. And he digs in his like hoodie pocket and he pulls out, it's a cell phone at the end of the day, but they show you, he pulls it out and he holds it like a gun and turns towards the cops and they shoot him. And at the time, the media just showed the one point of view that showed clearly that it was a cell phone, and they show cops from the backside shooting him, and then they called it sympathetic fire. The other cops started shooting as well. But then you look at it from the alternate perspective, like 3, 4, 5 days later, because that's how it usually goes. And you clearly see like, hey, this guy's running, and they pull, and it looks, I mean, you would all think it was a gun. And he turns towards the officers, and the officer shoots, so you're like, it must be a gun. So you see what I'm saying? Like, it's perspective in those things.
Right.
And then if
like
you were talking about 8, 9-year-olds, if you really want to horrify yourselves, I think it's a documentary. I'm drawing a blank on it. I wasn't planning on talking about it. It's called Child Monsters. And there's a home. It's like 12 kids that range in age from like 8 to 12 that have committed murder. They've murdered their family, their siblings, their friends, and various means and methods. And they interview these kids and they talk about what happened, and they're just expressionless that this is what they did.
Wow.
So yes, there are children that can commit violent, heinous acts. Again, we can talk about parenting, we can talk about environment, we can talk about all those things. But at the end of the day, you get called, hey, I mean, imagine this. 911, 8-year-old calls, my parents are dead. You walk in, they're like, oh my God. And then that same child has scissors in their hand. Drop the scissors. Oh, that's violent. That's an 8-year-old. Well, that's what the child just used to kill his parents. Wow. It'll change your perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. It gets weird.
It does. And that's where
Go ahead.
That's where I think like us having these conversations like this and giving all, like, as much as me and you can possibly look at it from all different angles, I think it is useful for law enforcement, useful for the public to look at it from all those different angles. Yeah.
Well, I've talked with friends of mine that are not in law enforcement that have kids, and we have these conversations. They rise up quite a bit. Just, well, what was going through your mind? How would you have handled it differently? And it's like, and you get into this long format conversation, which again, not everybody can do, not everybody wants to do, about law enforcement, what was going on, what are the facts of the case, all these things. And again, that's why that was one of the precursors for trying to start this podcast, is just talking through these things, showing other opinions.
Right.
But Mo, all right, we're getting to that point where we're about to time out, but I wanted to wrap it up as best we can.
Yeah. I would say, wrapping it up, that overall, most officers, like I told you, are out here to try to do a good job. I think we have undertrained officers that make bad decisions, and sometimes that gets tagged as, oh, that's an awful person. I think the number of awful officers out there are very small. Are they out there? Absolutely. If we encounter them, we need to own it and we need to take corrective action. But I think there's some things that we can do to better train our people in various things, but especially when we're talking about use of force, and having avenues for that remediation, to take that corrective action, having avenues to allow the public to come in and do evaluation, but have them to be trained for that evaluation. All those things collectively, I think, can make us be better if we can continue to move that way.
Yeah, and I'll finish it off by saying, you made a comment a little while back on this episode that we're humans too, and people don't want to go to jail. And I could tell you, law enforcement as a whole gets called all kinds of names under the skin. Things that you would never say to another human being will come out, especially in high adrenaline, highly potential violence. I'm not quite sure how to phrase that, will come out. And we're human beings as well. And we're trying to go home to our families. We're trying to deal with what we got going on. And there needs to be a long form conversation like we're doing, about these things. But Mo, I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, bye.